But what this is about citizens, is about certainty, is about stability, and will give us the groundwork to move forward. This is not the panacea to all our ills, and a growth agenda is absolutely needed. There is no question about that. But in my view, if our country votes no to this treaty, it will weaken our hands substantially, it will create massive uncertainty. And that's why I think debates like this today are very important, and I hope that we'll have an opportunity to answer questions on it. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, and again I'm glad to be here. So many points in so little time. I think the Minister is correct that we do need a stable currency, but you have to ask yourself the question, what country is at biggest risk of exiting the euro? And it is of course Greece, one of only 3 countries which has actually ratified this treaty. So whether this treaty is ratified or not, the problems inside the eurozone are far greater than that, and the pressures will continue. And they're there because of the continuation of policies of austerity, policies which are now thankfully being questioned in every part of Europe, including on the streets of Frankfurt over the weekend, where you had over 20,000 German citizens again protesting against these policies. And the reason why I'm arguing for a no vote is that this treaty copper fastens and enshrines into law the very policies of austerities which are leading to many of the problems in our economy. And let's deal with the text, not jargon and waffle, let's deal with the text. Article 3 requires a balanced budget provision, which requires us to reduce our structural deficit to 0.5% of GDP. The Department of Finance estimate it will be at 3.7%, by 2015 a gap of 3.2%, which equates to extra cutbacks on taxation of 5.7 billion. Now that's a fact based on the government's figures. Where are those cutbacks going to come from, and where are those tax hikes going to fall on? On the people whose children need SNAs, who are in receipt of social welfare, and so on. And what's that going to do for you, the traders and the businesses who rely on domestic demand? We've had 6 successive years of a fall in domestic demand. The continuation of these policies will only accelerate that. 5 businesses a day on average folded last year. Taking money out of people's pockets and crushing domestic demand can only further fuel that. So that is the baseline. And to meet those targets, that is what will be required. And the government side haven't answered that. That's black and white. The other key reason is that it undermines democracy. It's basically saying that we as citizens can elect any government we like, but they must implement these neoliberal and austerity policies. If the government, and if Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, as they seem to, want to implement austerity and want to implement these criteria, grand, off you go, do it, and we'll challenge that, but don't write it into our constitution. We need a different way of looking at things across Europe. Our campaign for a no vote is very much at the heart of growing opposition to austerity in France, in Greece, in the Netherlands, in Italy, and all across Europe, to look at the key issues of reducing the debt burden, the private debt burden that's been foisted on our shoulders, and looking at putting people to work. Precisely the policies which will be outlawed if this treaty is ratified, because it requires a speeding up of the repayment of the debt, not a renegotiation. So for those reasons we think we're far better to be at the heart of Europe now.
Thank you. Gavin Barrett.
Great, thanks very much indeed. Because I've only 3 minutes, I'm going to spend them looking at 2 of the most important issues raised by this treaty, but there are happily issues that have been raised by the previous speakers. Firstly, will the treaty affect the size of the deficit or debt control obligations that Ireland is under? And is it true, as Sinn Féin have alleged and others here, that this treaty will oblige us to pay out an extra 5 billion or more euro and increase austerity? Second question, what will be the consequences if we vote no? Now the answer to whether this treaty will oblige us to pay out anything extra is no. And the answer to that, notwithstanding what Claire has said, is that it actually won't make 1 iota of a difference. In actual fact, if you're far more likely to end up with austerity if you vote no to this treaty than if you vote yes. Let's look at the debt obligations in the treaty. These are governed by Article 4 of the Fiscal Treaty, and the obligation in the treaty is to reduce the debt to GDP ratio at an average rate of 1/20th per year. An exactly similar obligation is found in Article 1 of a 6-pack regulation that came into force last December. The debt obligation, therefore, won't make 1 iota of a difference to the obligations that we're already under. And if you vote no, if Ireland votes no, and we wake up the next morning, we'll be under the same debt reduction obligation. obligation. So that's the debt obligation. How about the deficit reduction obligation? Is that going to, if you like, cause austerity? Answer, actually, no. In fact, it's not going to make any difference at all either. And I'd like to explain briefly why. The Fiscal Treaty obliges us to comply with, very broadly and with a huge amount of wiggle room for the Commission, a medium-term objective of a lower so-called structural target, debt target, that's the deficit target, that's a cyclically adjusted deficit target of 0.5% of GDP. Now, why does that make so little difference to us? Answer, because all European Union states are already bound by a medium-term objective since last December of a cyclically adjusted deficit of -1% of GDP. So that's already there, so the adjustment is much smaller than that indicated. And furthermore, Ireland has a specific rule applying to it, because we've already agreed a medium-term objective with the Commission of, guess what, a -0.5% structurally adjusted deficit of structurally adjusted deficit. If you don't believe me, have a look at the latest edition of the Ireland Stability Programme. Page 31 is the date in question. End result, fiscal obligations make zero difference, debt obligations, zero difference. Now, what would the difference be if we vote no? Answer, very different story indeed. Have a look at recital 25 of the Fiscal Treaty and recital 5 of the preamble to the European Stability Mechanism. In both cases, it indicates that access to new bailout programmes under the European Stability Mechanism will be conditional from the 1st of March 2013 on the ratification of the Fiscal Treaty. No Fiscal Treaty, no new bailout programme. And that's pretty serious, because in 2014 we're facing an estimated 14 billion funding cliff, I beg your pardon, sorry, 18 billion funding cliff in that year. The markets are getting ever less likely, even this week, to fund us. So vote no, and we're effectively cancelling our default insurance. So in summary, vote yes, and we get an 18 billion bill in 2014, but a €0.7 trillion insurance policy. Vote no, and we'll get nothing but the bill. And the potential horror of a default going with it. Ladies and gentlemen, the choice is ours, but I know which way I'm going to be voting in relation to it.
Thank you. And finally, Caroline.
Well, it's interesting to hear Gavin Brown saying that, and because I only have 3 minutes, I'd encourage people to have a look. I'm not a member of it, but he's put a very good response to Dr. Merritt's points there on the National Platform website. Professor Anthony Cochrane has got a detailed letter which deals with everything that is there. I'm reminded of September 2008 when a classmate of mine, Brian Cowan and Brian Lenihan, made a very unwise decision in the dead of night on inadequate information. And that is a decision that we're all paying for today and that we're continuing to pay for as long as we don't address the problem of the bank debt and the guarantee that was given. I'm afraid that in this situation now, we are also in a situation where we're being motivated by fear. It was instrumental in that foolish decision. It's going to be instrumental in the foolish decision now if we say yes to this deal. And as Edmund Burke said, no passion so ineffectually robs the mind of all its powers of acting and reasoning as fear. I don't want us to see us making the same mistake twice. A number of countries have got cases in their courts in relation to this deal. First thing you have to know, and you won't find it, unfortunately, in the Referendum Commission, other than in the most oblique way, is that this fiscal compact is part of the permanent bailout deal, which has been put together as the funding runs out in the EFSF and the EFSM, and also to put it on a legal basis that isn't questionable. Because you might remember that when the bailout fund which is currently in operation came into existence, it was contrary to the terms of the European treaties which prevented bailouts to occur, and so a clause which dealt with natural disasters and other circumstances beyond the control of governments was used to justify the establishment of those funds. It was controversial, and as I've said, this package, the ESM, which is the European Stability Mechanism, the permanent bailout mechanism with the firewall of 700 billion, and this fiscal compact were established to get around that problem. In order to get over the questions of illegality, and can I just say that these two packages, these two treaties, are before the Estonian Supreme Court, the German Constitutional Court, where a former Minister for Justice has taken the case, the Irish High Court in Thomas Pringle's case, and you might have seen the Dutch Court of Auditors last year said that they too questioned very seriously the lack of supervision by the democratically elected institutions of the ESM's operation itself. We need to look at this, we need to look at this very seriously, because these are the bodies that we're talking about giving control of our budgeting and our fiscal affairs too. So there's a much bigger picture than just this document. And it is interesting that we've been given a referendum on the one part of the deal they actually don't need our consent on to go ahead. They don't need us to say yes to this fiscal compact in order for it to become operative in European law. On the other hand, there are very good legal arguments as to why we should be having a referendum on the decision to amend the European treaties to allow the establishment of the ESM. They do need our consent to that. That has to be the unanimous decision of the 27 member states. So we've got an ace up our sleeve, which we aren't using. We do not object to the establishment of the bailout fund. We're simply saying if we withhold that card in this current uncertainty, it would be a very wise thing to do. There are a number of people, I mean, I too have been before Oireachtas Joint Committees on various affairs, and so have all of our leading economists. And it repays careful study to look at what they all have to say. Almost to a man, and woman, I don't know if there was a woman, but almost to a man, they all think this is a dreadful deal. It's been described as a suicide pact. They all are reluctantly saying yes to it because they feel that we will only get access to the permanent bailout fund if we say yes to this, because that is written into the ESM treaty. Professor of World Politics in Finland has said, she puts it together for everybody. I could give you a number of quotes from government ministers across the EU on this.
We need to wrap it up there.
Yeah, she said that she talks about the treaty's anti-democratic nature. The exceptional provisions allowed for under the terms of the fiscal compact are hostile to the basic principles of democracy, as is the fact that the compact gives rise to legal norms which override EU member states' own constitutions and which cannot be changed by democratic means. In a democracy, no rule or principle can ever be set in stone, but must always be adapted to the possibilities and constraints at hand. Now, we know that this week there's an awful lot going on. Monty went to the G8 conference with
we have
proposals, and there are growth proposals being made by President Hollande which deal with our corporate tax. We really need to look at that. 100,000 jobs in this country are riding on corporate tax. I was at an international law conference in Mexico last week. I was in the States 2 weeks previously in Washington and New York. And I can tell you what drives investment here is our corporate tax rate.
Okay,
anything that interferes with that is going to be extremely detrimental to any further future direct investment. We know that we are going to have next year almost 121% debt ratio to our GDP, and Poland has 50%. We need every advantage we can get, and I'm urging you not to say yes to a compact which is going to give us more of the same and expect to produce a different result.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you for all those contributions. I'm just going to open to the floor. Anyone there with a question, and maybe you would identify yourself as well, in mind? Anyone there? Yes.
Carmel Lady is my name. I just want to say successive Irish governments have misrepresented the realities of our deepening relationship and dependencies on Europe. And every time we approach a referendum, we pay a price for this. This treaty sounds like its aim of keeping spending and debts within tight limits is a good idea. But the problem is there's nothing in this treaty that would have prevented the crises that we're already in. So my question is there anything in the treaty that will lift us out of it?
Okay, anything in specific different really in this treaty then?
Yes. Well, anything that can help us to go forward other than austerity.
Okay. On the yes side then, Lucinda, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I think the key part of the treaty that deals with previous economic cycles is the balanced budget rule. That's the key element which obliges governments to keep spending balanced over an economic cycle. And what that means is that, you know, in times of boom, governments will be obliged to run a budget surplus, which wasn't the case in this country, and certainly has contributed. I'm not saying it's the sole cause of our collapse. Obviously, there were a number of factors. One was the banking crisis. The other element was the economic crisis and the fallout from Lehman Brothers. But the third element was bad management of public finances, and that is addressed in this treaty. And I would contend that had we a structural balance rule in place in advance, we'll say of the 97 election, or 2002 election, 2007 election, there would certainly have been constraints on the government, and we would be in a better position now. We would have been cushioned from some of the effects of the economic crisis. Not all of it, obviously, because it wouldn't have dealt with the banking aspect, but we certainly would have been insulated and wouldn't have been hit quite so aggressively by the economic crisis.
But just to, maybe to paraphrase you, Carl, maybe right, I suppose the point being, and as Gavin made the point there, there has already been a lot of, very little different in this treaty, and since the Growth and Stability Pact, we've always had to have these budget targets, we've always had to have these deficit targets, but the problem was that it doesn't seem to have, A, countries weren't sticking to it, and B, it didn't really see, look where we are now in Europe or Greece, this is what people on the no side would say. So is there any, is there anything in this particular treaty, do you think it's going to work this time? Do you think people are going to stick to it? Do you think they're going to go with it this time?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's, just drilling down to what's different even between this treaty and the six-pack, for example, is the role of the European Court of Justice and the automaticity, which is one of those great sort of Brussels words, which is essentially that up until this point, in order to enforce the rules, you had to get a qualified majority of member states. So you needed 55% of member states, plus encompassing 65% of the population of the European Union, to impose sanctions or to take any sort of redress against a country that broke the rules. And of course, countries didn't want to come together, especially against the big member states, to discipline them or to wrap them across the knuckles.
Of 20th over a period of years. It's not clear when that actually kicks in, but certainly it has to be done by 2018. And because the NTMA figures are given up to 2015, people have done calculations on the basis of those figures. And they say that even on those figures, we would have to double our GDP between now and 2015 if we were to reach just the 60%, an impossibility right across the EU.
That's
actually correct, and I can give you the
Gavin, would you maybe come back to that? Would you agree with that? Or?
No.
It's an economic question that economists have written on. Can I say one thing? There is one difference that this fiscal compact does make. Nobody, you've talked about the fact that it's the same as recognising what's already there in the Maastricht obligations and the six-pack, and that's true. But what will happen in this fiscal compact is the countries agree to surveillance of each other's budgets, and they've agreed to levy fines on countries that run excessive budget deficits, which gives them fiscal oversight to reach just the 60%, an impossibility right across the EU. That is actually correct, and I can give you the
Gavin, would you maybe come back to that? Would you agree with that? Or?
No.
It's an economic question that economists have written on. Can I say one thing? There is one difference that this fiscal compact does make. Nobody, you've talked about the fact that it's the same as recognising what's already there in the Maastricht obligations and the six-pack, and that's true. But what will happen in this fiscal compact is the countries agree to surveillance of each other's budgets, and they've agreed to levy fines on countries that run excessive budget deficits, which gives them fiscal oversight authority. And you may have seen, or you may not have seen, that last Thursday, building on this fiscal compact going through, Jean-Claude Trichet has described the next step, which got a very warm reception in Brussels. He said, and I'm quoting here, "The next step will be to take a country into receivership when its political leaders or its parliament cannot implement sound budgetary policies approved by the EU. The action would have democratic accountability if it were approved by the Council of Heads of State and the elected European Parliament." The idea got a warm reception from leading economists and prominent Europeans. A very radical proposal couched as a modest step. We need to look at where we're going. The fiscal compact is going
to...
just
the questioner is right. Ireland kept its nose clean with regards to the rules of the rules that are being implemented up until 2007, and Spain kept its nose clean up until 2008. And both states are in major difficulty, and part of the fact is that private debt, the debt of the banks, etc., in both states, is not being dealt with whatsoever in this process. Some people claim that this is simple housekeeping rules, but look at the debt of households around the state. There are thousands of households that, if they had to live by these economic rules, will be out on the road tomorrow. There are thousands of businesses, if they had to live by these debt income ratios, will be closed tomorrow. I have a particular economic view, but I would never tell people to constitutionalise it, to put it into national law, make it an international treaty where this is the case. The New Deal, Roosevelt took America out of the Great Depression. This wouldn't, if America was signed up to this treaty, they would never be able to do it. This puts a nail in Keynesian economics. It prevents stimuluses from ever happening again.
Okay, Gavin, will you come in first there and then Darren?
Okay, actually, this brings me back to something the father said at the beginning of his talk. He portrayed the situation as being one of we're bound by rules. If we sign up to this thing, we're not bound by rules if we don't. That's not true. We're already bound by these rules. So this treaty actually doesn't amount to a choice between Keynesianism and non-Keynesianism. The simple reality of the matter is we're already bound by the rules. It's more about enforcement of the existing rules, not actually changing the rules. As regards to the question that was asked, of course it would have made a difference. Ireland's bond yield during the last week, if anyone noticed, rose by about 1.5%. Why did it rise by 1.5%? Because of Greece. This treaty would have prevented the situation that's happened with Greece, which has been a huge part of this particular crisis. So that's one particular point about it as well. I mean, obviously, we're all in agreement, I think, that growth is very necessary, but also fiscally responsible policies are also part of it as well. And you cannot go on spending continuously more than you actually take in. That's not a viable situation. The markets won't stand for it anyway. And unfortunately, balancing our books is actually part of the solution.
Darren, do you want to come in there because you've been trying to get in there?
Well, I think Gavin said it better than I could. I know other people have other questions. So no, I
Okay,
think that's been covered.
okay, Claire, do anything on that point or
Yeah,
will we
I
move
just
on?
think it's the most strangest argument I've heard, that this treaty won't make any difference at all, that it just perpetuates the status quo. So what's all the fuss about? Why have we only 3 countries which have signed up to it? Why did Germany delay signing up? Why have France? It's ridiculous. If it's already there and it's no big deal, that's a very strange argument, and it has been refuted. The reality is, as the questioner said, the criteria laid down in this treaty, Ireland ticked all of the boxes on all of them. It met all of the criteria. This problem here that we have, of private debt being foisted on our shoulders and the bailout and the continued costs of that, that's a key problem which has not been addressed by that, and that's part of what we're funding to pay for.
Okay, Darren, do you want to make this
there's
point?
one real quick thing, you know, that it's very difficult for me to keep my mouth shut, but the fact of the matter is, and Carl, you asked the question, one, you know, that it appears that every time it comes up to an EU treaty that people tell you how important Europe is, right? Like, we exported into the Eurozone last year 37 billion euro worth of goods and 26 billion euro worth of services into our Eurozone partners. What would have made a difference...
That's not for debate.
No, Paddock, what would have made a difference was the scorecard, effectively, as well. So if you look now that across all the different sectors, and in this, you will see where it will be monitored, each state, as to is it growing too much in one area? Are we actually spending too much in another area? Is our public spending going up too high? And if you look at the scorecard now, by the way, that you will actually see red lights going off in all countries at the moment across Europe. Okay? So this isn't, as I said at the very start, it's not going to solve everything, but it's going to actually set very specific parameters that actually, in my view, are required. Because I tell you, when real austerity is very difficult and cuts are really difficult, but I tell you what, if you don't get a handle on your spending and bridging your deficit, that if you allow the debt to continue, you'll have much greater austerity.
I'm going to move on here because everyone wants to say. There's another gentleman there behind you, Carl. There, yeah?
Just
then we'll go to
question about Padder said at the start something about strength. Voting no will strengthen our mandate for growth, drawing allusions to the election of Francois Hollande and what's going on in the Western German region. And I just don't really see how that's true. I mean, voting no to this treaty has nothing to do with the Growth Pact. The Growth Pact is perhaps a separate issue altogether, which can happen if we accept this treaty or if we don't. And I just feel that both yourself and Claire are suggesting that if we vote no, we won't have to make cutbacks ever, which I don't believe is true, because in order for us to have a stimulus package, we need money. And we currently have less money than we need to run our current deficit.
yeah.
To create a stimulus package, we would need more money. We need to run a higher deficit. And who's going to give it to us? We are this treaty, and you can call it a blackmail clause if you like, perhaps it is, but we're a small fish in this. And that's the cruel reality of the world. We're a small fish, and we're being given an opportunity to access money on terms that we keep the rules we kept to for the last 15 years. Up until 2007, we kept to our 3%, and we ran budget surpluses during the 97-2007 period as well, which I think Cindy suggests we didn't. I'm pretty sure you're wrong on that. And well, we put away 20 billion for a rainy day. It just happened the storm came.
Okay, that's
but
very clear question there.
Just to finish, where are we going to get the money to provide the stimulus without access to the ESM?
Yeah.
And what's wrong with having to balance your budget?
First of all, fiscal discipline is not the gift of right-wing economists or economies like Denmark and Sweden, for example, are very fiscally disciplined, but they tax higher wealth more, and they also spend more on public services.
But they still balance
They're
their
also
budget.
very, and that's what we're suggesting. And they're also very competitive as states. Secondly, where will we get the money? First, it has to be remembered that the government, or the last government, will say that we were forced into this bailout, first and foremost. Second thing, this is a bailout of a bailout. The first bailout hasn't worked, so they want to put us into another bailout which has exactly the same infrastructure. The third issue is the litmus test of whether we will get funding in the future is determined by political self-interest of the core. Is it in the self-interest of Germany and France to create a default in Ireland, which would lead to hundreds of billions of euros being wiped off German and French banks because Ireland wants to renegotiate? That is a completely disproportionate response to a partner within the euro wanting a different direction within Europe. There's absolutely no way the realpolitik would allow for that. Citigroup put out a note to their investors in the last 2 days saying to them that whichever way Ireland votes, Ireland will get a bailout in the future if it needs it.
So where do you think then, where do you think we get the money? Just so people are clear on this. Our bailout programme runs up at the end of 2013. We've got a major funding cliff at the beginning of 2014.
The ESM.
So the ESM is one, and the other option is probably go to the markets.
Well, no, the ESM is my answer, and I give this answer, and then people come back to me, but where will we get the money? And I go, the ESM. Yeah. And then the point is, the ESM, in the end of the day, and in the recycle, there is a blackmail clause, but in the articles of the ESM treaty, it states the purpose of this is to create stability within the Europe, and that the funding will be used to ensure stability. And in legal arguments in Europe previously, where the recital and the articles differs, the precedence is that the legal direction is given towards the articles. There is no doubt legally and economically, the litmus test of where we get the funding is on whether hundreds of billions of euros will be paid back towards German banks. And we have a veto on the ESM.
Just to get to the core of this issue, one of the major issues that's coming out all the time is will we get access to funding of the ESM, the bailout fund or not? In the referendum commission, which is supposed to be an independent body, says that if we don't vote yes, we won't have access to ESM. But you're saying we will. And I'm just wondering, is there any...
Yeah, just because you tell us so.
No, because I tell you, because the
Why are you saying we will?
I tell you, because the government were clever enough that, the government schedules the votes on the amendments to Article 136 of the European treaties until after this. Are the government going to put 11 billion into the ESM and then pass a treaty that would actually stop us going into it?
So you're kind of hoping, I'm not trying to, but you're kind of hoping that once we, that when it gets to the ESM stage, that we'll be able to veto it.
There's absolutely no doubt that we have.
Okay, so we have the S side to refute that.
Sinn Féin had private members then demanding that we wouldn't ratify the ESM until after the referendum.
So you're saying it's not the government to decide to do that?
It's also, if I could say, sorry, listen, but very briefly, you've heard two things here that are crucially important. You've heard Sinn Féin say today to talk about higher taxes. And I would ask on the no side in particular, which we're talking here with people who are traders and are employing people and retailers, is what their stance is on corporation tax.
See,
like what's it though? No bit of on pattern, right? What I'm saying to you here is, we're talking to people. You did a good run at it. You're talking to people here to say we're going to have access to the ESM. We're actually not, right? If we vote no to the treaty, it's clear we won't, right? The other thing is your own party leader Jerry Adams only last year said to the ECB, the IMF and the Troika that he wants them out of the country and they can take their money with them. So where's the reality of this situation? I think people are entitled to ask where you get the funding and what would you do with corporation tax? What would you do with corporation tax?
There's a number of points there made, and it's corporation tax for us is not in the discussion here whatsoever. We have no interest in changing the corporation tax as from what is. Your party was all over the media saying that it wasn't great that Hollande got elected in France. Hollande wanted higher taxes and higher spending within each state. And the point is, we're saying very briefly that we would create a 48% tax rate on earnings over 100,000 euros, which would mean 7 cents per euro after that number there. And we're suggesting that we would introduce a wealth tax which would take in 800 million euros, similar to what's already involved in France.
Okay, so can you go back in there? It's probably a different point now. But
well, I just want to make the point about corporation tax.
Yeah.
I think this is a really important one, and Caroline and sort of obliquely Peadar have stated their commitment to corporate tax and to retaining our autonomy to maintain a 12.5% rate. I think we have to make this very clear. It was not easy to exclude taxation from this treaty. And there are plenty of other countries, there are lots of divergent views across the European Union about tax harmonisation, about CCCTB, about all of these things. And there was a desire, yes, from France and from some other member states to include corporate tax and references to tax harmonisation in this treaty, and we resisted it, and we resisted it successfully. And the link between this treaty to the ESM means that we can access the ESM potentially, should we need to, without bringing the issue of corporate tax back onto the table. Now, what you're advocating, of course, Padre, is that we reject this very straight, already negotiated, uncomplicated route to the ESM, should we need it. And you're saying that we should go on a kind of a wing and a prayer mission.
It was already open.
Put our corporate tax and a whole lot of other issues on the table, so that when we go potentially in 2014 looking for funding to keep the state running, corporate tax and everything else will be on the agenda. Guaranteed.
Could you just come in here just on this the issue of funding? Do you have any comment on this ESM thing? This is very confusing for the electorate. That in one sense, one person saying we can get the ESM funding, and the other person is saying we don't. Like, which is what is the reality? What do you think?
Well, the reality of the matter is that the member states have gone to the trouble of putting it into two separate preambles of two separate treaties, saying that they will not give a new bailout after the 1st of March 2013 to any state which is not ratified the fiscal treaty. That creates a legal problem. That's the reality of the matter. There's no doubt about that. The second point about that is that the member states have to exercise discretion in any case in relation to each and every individual bailout problem. We'll have snubbed them to their faces in not ratifying the fiscal treaty. How do you think they're going to react to that? Do you think they're just going to say, that's fine, we'll give you a bailout anyway? That's the next point. Sorry, hold on a second please, I haven't finished. The next point is that you said we undoubtedly have a bailout, a veto in relation to the ESM treaty. That is also not true. And actually a point in relation, or at least it is not clear that it is true, and actually an interesting point in relation to that is that the ESM treaty will come into force on the 1st of July 2012 before the amendment to Article 136 takes place.
Is our consent needed to the amendment to Article 136 to allow the establishment of
yes, we have it.
So we have a veto to withdraw the consent.
If you allow me to answer, we have a veto in relation to Article 136.
We have a card which we're not playing.
But we don't have a veto in relation to the ESM treaty. Just one final point that I'd like to make, if I could.
One final point, then Claire's going to come in
there. Claire said that I used a very strange argument in relation to the debt and deficit obligations. Well, perhaps you ought to say that to Carl Whelan as well, who's making exactly the same arguments. And by the way, I'm not saying that the treaty won't make any difference, but the principal difference it will make is in relation to the enforcement of existing obligations. In doing so, it will provide reassurance to Germany and make it electorally easier in Germany to provide assistance and stimulus to other member states.
Okay, thanks.
You actually said it 3 times that it wouldn't make any difference.
I said it wouldn't make any difference to your fiscal. I beg your pardon. I said it wouldn't make any difference to our debt and deficit obligations.
And in actual fact, if these terms were to be enforced across Europe, 18 out of the 25 countries would not meet the criteria presently. You'd be talking about taking out 166 billion in cuts and extra taxes across Europe. So what that's going to do for the export market in Ireland is anybody's guess. The reality here is that it is absolutely factually accurate to say that the ESM has not been ratified yet. It does require an alteration of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, and every single member state, including Ireland, has to sign up to that. So it is a blackmail clause, because Ireland has the right to say no on that. As for us being outside Europe, if we do that, have you seen what's happened in Europe? The election of Hollande, the elections in Greece, the fact that the Dutch government can't come together to ratify the treaty, that the Italian biggest party are saying they want it renegotiated. Far from actually, if we were to ratify it now, we'd be the 4th country, along with Greece who've signed up to it, Portugal who've signed up to it, and Luxembourg. Not great bedfellows, to be honest. We can be part of a different Europe fighting for a bit better change and more stimulus.
Okay, Caroline, can you just come in there and then we'll go to another question.
Apart from any of that, when Greece signed up to it, it was described by many commentators as an insincere acceptance of impossible conditions. It will be exactly that for us. And analysis has been done of the euro area data from 1990 to 2008. And during that entire period, 1990 to 2008, only 2 countries, Finland and Malta, complied with the fiscal pact criteria more than 50% of the time. The rest of the member states, which includes Germany and France, by the way, ran deficits, sustained deficits for more than 60% of the time. So let's face it, guys, we'll go straight to the penalty clause. If anything comes out of today, if you remember anything that I said today, just this. We do have an acknowledgement that our consent is needed to the Article 136 amendment to allow the establishment of the European Stability Mechanism. That's a very powerful trading tool. We get one crack at dealing with our bank debt. The bank debt is what's drowning this economy. This bank debt, which Claire said, is being foisted on the taxpayers. Even if we go to euro bonds and we mutualise euro bonds, the debt is still our debt to pay. And so it's in our interest and in all of Europe's interest that we get some kind of a deal together on bank debt now. We must start trying to separate the bank debt from the sovereign debt. It must be done right across Europe. It is the cancer that is eating away at every economy and that may very well push the euro to destruction and will most certainly push us to sovereign default.
Okay, well,
we have one card to play. It's the only one we've got.
I think everyone in the room would agree that there's an issue with bank debt. We all know that, but I suppose the treaty is not about that. It's a specific treaty, so we'll try and...
The real politics
we
must look
Why
at
there
the situation.
Well, because you have to ask yourself the question. The big thing that's being posed here is we're going to need a bailout. In other words, we're going to need another loan. Why are we going to need another loan? Because this huge debt has been voiced.
Well, we are going to need, I mean, we are going to need money for summer.
One brief point, there are fines if we don't meet the debt to GDP ratios, etc. Those fines will be apportioned on the section of our debt GDP ratio which is private debt, banking debt. So we'll not only pay the private banking debt, we'll pay fines for taking them on if we don't pay them back in time.
Okay, final question. We're running out of time here. Malik, explain. You have a good question there?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been very informative. And I think one of the things that gets lost here is the general public who is going to fall upon to actually make this vote. And there's a lot of concern in the public domain. There's a huge concern and confusion about this whole treaty and about the debates that's happening. What seems to happen, what's happening here is it comes between the left and the right, or those who say no and those who say yes. And we're more inclined to look at the media. The speak hasn't happened on the ground. There's a vast amount of people out there that would be inclined to fall into the protest vote of the no because they feel powerless. Not because they want to say no, because they feel powerless and they're very, very angry. And that would be self-sabotage. And one wants to have to be very, very, very careful around those issues. It would appear that out there on the street that the no vote is actually gaining a huge amount of momentum because people are actually quite angry. If you don't know all this great technical detail, you don't know all this ins and outs of the policies, they're just basically acting like most people are from their instincts. So there's a problem with that. I'd also like to ask anybody, where is Labour in this debate? Where are they at the end of the day? What happened to us? Where are they gone? Because at the end of the day, in terms of the balance that we need from the no, in terms of where the left is coming in from, and there's a lot of truth in what the left are saying. Where is Labour and where is their assets?
I think you've got
in the final thing of the hunt, it's a matter between dependence or codependence. It's a matter of whether we actually say yes to this and go into this challenge that's out there in front of us, or whether we fall back into the line of protest. And where protest is going to lead us, on my mind, is that it's just going to lead us into a position of chaos. I personally would rather a managed austerity where I have a legitimacy to stand up and challenge Europe if I feel it's going wrong, rather than saying no, where I have no legitimacy whatsoever. And they're my personal remarks. So for me, I would be inclined to vote yes for this.
Okay.
Alex, we're not saying there's austerity. There's austerity. I'll tell you the truth. There is austerity either way. We haven't even seen austerity yet.
I understand that.
So we're not saying
you're all coming from an informed point of view. The general public out there are very, very confused because it's coming on top of a huge amount of confusion both in terms of our national government, in terms of what's happened, in terms of austerity, in terms of job losses. There's chaos out here. And that's not being addressed.
Just
so if we can get convinced of better management in a European context, we'll be out here like
I agree with a lot of what you said. I believe in an EU of equal partners within Europe. And what we have had, though, I believe, is an intellectual deference from our elected reps here towards the European Union. What's handed down is accepted. A healthy European Union is a robust European Union, where you and I stand up and say, actually no, that's not the direction we want to go. We would like our European Union to be X, Y and Z, and that there's much more of a robust exchange of views. Being the yes people all the time is not the strongest way to build a union. And the reason why I believe that a lot of people are on the street joining the no campaign is people can join the dots. There's a very, very simple, austerity is not just a word. Austerity is a higher household charge. Austerity is a higher water charge. Austerity is less teachers in the schools. It's less hospital beds. And our very strong point in this is if you cut back, and this is an economic policy. There are other economic policies. If you use cuts only to reach a balanced deficit without using growth, you're going to have a negative growth level.
They're not joining the no campaign, they're joining the confused campaign, which is very, very confused. They're joining a confused campaign. They're confused. There's a lot of people out there who are confused. and they want to make some sort of protest, they don't necessarily want to vote no, but if that's the only option for them, they will through that situation with fear.
Okay.
And you need to be really clear about that.
Okay, just want
I will
somebody
not
to
want
come in
to
on
end
that.
up in that kind of
Okay,
place.
Lucinda, just on that.
Can I just say, Mannix, thank you for your intervention, and I actually think that you're speaking a lot of sense. And I think it is a temptation, and there is a risk that people, in order to exercise their frustration and their anger and their genuine disappointments, that they could vote no. And I think that's something that we as a government have to convince people. You know, it doesn't hurt me personally, it doesn't hurt the Taoiseach, it doesn't hurt the government to vote no, it hurts the country and it hurts our citizens, and I think that's a point that we really have to communicate. You know, at the end of the day, it's a problem that's going to go much, much deeper. But I have to say, just on the point that Heather is making about, you know, cuts to hospitals and cuts to schools, this, I can only describe it as claptrap coming from Sinn Féin, who in Northern Ireland are introducing swinging cuts in the health service, closing down hospitals, closing down, I think the target is 70 schools. Cutting back hundreds of millions of euros. So, like, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I think it's the most cynical. It is the most cynical jumping on a bandwagon for absolutely selfish political gain that Sinn Féin is peddling these lies in the Republic of Ireland while doing the absolute opposite in the North.
You know, first of all, I welcome your interest in the 6 counties. But you know, when I was in college, there was a book called Politics for Dummies. It's like IT for Dummies or Italian for Dummies. And it showed the difference between a constitutional sovereign state who can enter and negotiate international treaties, that can raise funds and that can spend funds. The North, not yet, is one of those states. We in Sinn Féin are doing our damnedest to bring home sovereignty and self-determination from London to Ireland. Ironically, on this side of the border, we've got a government who's doing exactly the opposite. It's taking self-determination and sovereignty and handing it over to Europe.
Why don't you refuse? Why don't you tell London that you won't do it? That you won't.
We're coming out of a long conflict issue.
We're not getting into debate right now, right? The final point I wish to wrap it up.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what Mannix said. Look, and to everyone here, there's a lot of work to be done on this referendum yet, and there is a lot of anger out there. There's no question. I can't answer the question for you as to where Labour are, Mannix. I don't know. And I haven't met them on the doorsteps yet either. But what needs to happen is that for the Yes campaign, and for my part, and for my party's part, I've tried to be positive about this, in the sense of this is specifically about the treaty and how this country moves forward. And yes, there are people out there who are rightly annoyed and angry and who want to give the government or the body politic a bloody nose. But all I would say to all of you here that are present is that this isn't the one to do it on. Is that there will be local elections, there will be by-elections, there will be general elections, there will be everything else. This is far too important. That my party had taken a stance on this, that it may have been more opportunistic, like some others, to stay on the no side of things. Hannah mentioned one really interesting thing, that if you say yes all the time, that you know it's somehow weakening your position. But I'm just wondering what it's like when you say no all the time, going right back to 1969 and earlier. That, you know, Europe, I just ask you to think and weigh it up. Europe, on balance, in my view, hasn't got everything right over the last 35, 40 years. But on balance, I think Europe has been extremely positive for this country and for its citizens. And if it was down to Padder, by the way, we wouldn't even be in it.
Okay,
we wouldn't be in the EU.
One final question to this gentleman here, and then we're definitely wrapping it up.
I agree with the point made earlier that the more this turns into an inter-party squabble, the more confusion it creates. Lucinda started by basically, I suppose, conscious of the fact that so many undecided in the process at the moment, to talk about reducing the doubts. I don't think this debate has reduced the doubt for me. I also think that it's an insult to the intelligence of the people to kind of think that because they're angry, that the only thing the only conclusion that they will come to is to vote no. People are very confused and equally annoyed about the fact that there's no consideration to be given to postponing this particular treaty or referendum. And that's not just adding to the confusion, that's adding to the anger.
Well, maybe as a government representative, is there what's the position
I
of
mean, it's
postponing or
obvious
what's
that
the
things
area
has not been resolved to a satisfactory
Yeah, you're saying that's an issue for the government.
There can't be confusion as opposed to allowing the beginnings of elucidation.
Okay, just on that specific point.
Just the point about, I certainly don't mean to insult anybody's intelligence by saying that they will simply vote no as a default position because they're angry. But I have met people who are voting no because they're angry, and that's a legitimate position, and they're perfectly entitled to hold that view. And I think the onus, as Dara and others have pointed out, is on us to convince people that this is it transcends party politics, and it is so important and so vital for the country and for our citizens, that we vote yes. And that's my challenge. It's the challenge of everybody else in government in particular. So
just on the postponement issue.
On the issue of postponement, I mean, we have a very clear process laid out in the Referendum Act, which says that once the steps are taken in the Dáil to introduce the referendum bill, then it becomes essentially a constitutional process, and there is no leeway or no opportunity for the government to derail that process. The people have to have the opportunity to have their say, and I don't see any benefit other than sending doubt and uncertainty into the global sphere in relation to this country's commitment to our currency, to our economic recovery, to the programme that we're in, and to our efforts to increase stability in Ireland. Can I finish my point? Because I think this is important. The actual effects of, and it's not possible, that's the first point, but the actual effects of deciding, well, you know what, we'll leave it another few months, and sure, we might have a referendum then, would cause huge instability and would cause bond spreads to go wild, and would ensure that crucial investment decisions into this state would be postponed. And I don't think that's
finally. So just
I think talk of causing instability is madness. It belies the reality that's happening around Europe all the time in any case, where we have massive instability. That's one of the reasons which is feeding into the debate here, which is causing a lot of the problems, I think, for people. There is legislation being tabled before the Oireachtas tomorrow night by Shane Ross to deal with that very issue, which would allow us to postpone it. So you've just dodged the issue again, but the reality is you could put it off if you wanted. Now, personally,
I've just said that it's not in our interest.
And it sounds like it's not going to happen anyway, to postpone it, as you say.
But it could happen. The point is, it is a confused debate, and I think here, I don't think anybody would leave this any the wiser, to be honest. And there are people
on that point, just we're going to finish up on that, just to kind of bring us to an end, because we're well over time. Just to kind of say to people, as somebody here is kind of an independent voice, it really is worth reading the treaty, which is very short. But maybe even looking at two themes of it, if you like. One is about balancing the budgets, and the austerity it's now been called, even though that word is mentioned. And the second one is this ESM fund, whether you have access to it or not. And maybe thinking about it in those two terms, reading it in those bases and making up your own mind.
There is something else that's very important to say, and it's this, is that this fiscal compact doesn't have to come into operation until the 1st of January 2013. The ground has changed, the sands are shifting under us. All these other European countries are not signing up to it. They're looking at this proposal in a different way. They're talking about other elements they want to introduce to the deal. It would be very foolish of us to sign to that context. Note that, number one. The second thing to note, we can have a second referendum on it. If we can't postpone it in the way it's been suggested by Shane Ross, you can postpone it by saying no now and reconsider it again. We've done that before. This is too important not to think carefully. This is September 2000 to date again. The other thing I would say to you is, we are having a referendum on, in a way, the least important part of this permanent bailout deal, the one that they actually don't need us to consent to. We have got an ace up our sleeve. The ace is they need our consent to amend Article 136 to allow the establishment of the European Stability Mechanism. We haven't spoken about that really today. It is not spoken about in any of the referendum literature that has come in my door from the Referendum Commission, and I would urge people, please, if you want to know about it, a quick way to look, go to your computer, go onto YouTube and look up ESM Treaty of Debt. It's made by some German group, I don't know who, but they describe in detail and accurately the content of the ESM. Realise what it means for us if we are going to, as we will be, part of the programme countries subject to the control of the ESM, all of whose officers are unelected, unaccountable, immune from prosecution, their premises are inviolable, their documents are inviolable.
The IMF is immune from prosecution as well, Caroline.
No, not in the same way. You must look at that. ESM.
On the other side of that, on the pro side of the website, the Irish Institute of European Affairs, IEA, has a great, if you just, on the pro side, if Caroline's got one of them, that's good on the pro side with a lot of detail on that. It's very clear to read for people if they want a bit more information. Okay, we leave it at that. Thank you very much for